And what I have learned from talking to governors across this great United States is when they come up with a fantastic idea, they believe that every other governor is doing it. And so they don't think it's a big deal. This box-in strategy that has been being used here in Missouri, I think really is an important example of how to really protect vulnerable individuals. And when you see how Missouri has done with their long-term care facilities, when you see what they've done with the VA care facilities, it's really an important critical message. In Arkansas, we saw a really incredible practice on a COVID booklet for parents and children going back to school, to really inform the children and families about what COVID-19 is, and really bring that family up to a knowledge of how important masks are, how important social distancing is. And I think my fundamental message to everyone in Missouri is we have a habit of looking at an institution where there's a test positive case, and we don't look back and say that case came from the community. And so all of us across Missouri, whether you're in Kansas City or St. Louis, whether you're in Springfield, Joplin, or Jefferson City, whether you're in Branson or at the Lake of the Ozarks, our job in each and every community is to decrease viral spread and a clear pathway forward together to control this virus. What does that mean? We need every American and everybody in Missouri to be wearing a mask and socially distancing. What does social distancing mean? It means that we're asking every citizen to not have large gatherings in their backyards until we have an effective vaccine, to really curtail those gatherings when you bring people together, because we know there's amazing asymptomatic spread. And throughout the South, we have seen in rural areas and in urban areas, which are equally impacted by this virus. Remember, in Alabama and Mississippi and the parishes of Louisiana, over 95% of the counties are impacted. That is not the same in Missouri. You have some counties here with very low case numbers. You have counties with under 5% test positivity. Every person needs to really ensure that they're not infecting another, and that means we can't have these large parties because of the level of asymptomatic spread. I know we all want to believe our family members or our neighbors couldn't possibly have COVID. I can tell you across the United States that they do, and it doesn't matter if you're in a rural area or an urban area, they do. They don't know they're infected, and they're spreading the virus to others. We've seen parties in Texas where 150 out of 150 people were infected, an outdoor party. So this is what we need to do together, because together, if we decrease community spread in this common sense pathway forward, we can have the schools open, we can have the universities and colleges open, we can have the sports teams, but we all have to do our part to get these cases down no matter where you live in the United States. So I will stop there and take your questions, but I just want to conclude by, again, thanking the governors and the governor's staff for the really privilege to be here, to hear from them, to learn from them, and to take these ideas back onto our governor's call that is just a few hours from now. So thank you.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Birx. Thanks for coming today. I'm kind of hiding back here behind these cameras. Hi.
I see you.
Hello. Missouri was one of the last states to shut down and one of the first to open back up again, and there is no statewide mask mandate. The governor has said part of the reason is our population diversity, I guess, with ultra-urban and very rural areas, and so one size doesn't fit all. What is your message to the governor here and to all of us, I guess, as far as how we've been doing?
Well, what I have learned across this country is every governor and every mayor is fiercely protective of their citizens. And what I've learned from this governor is that really the fact that Missouri has we drove through towns across the mountains that had 157 people who lived there. And so getting a message to them to really understand how to protect one another is very key, but also understanding the unique situation of these isolated mountain communities and these isolated rural communities. What I discussed with the governor is what I think is an excellent example from Texas, who had similar, very rural areas that were not impacted as greatly as some of the more urban areas, and small metro areas, which I just described about Joplin, Jefferson City, and Springfield. And what the governor of Texas did is, in any county that has more than 20 cases, had a mask mandate to really make it clear that you're following the data. And I want to really reassure everyone from Missouri, the data that was presented today by the group led by the governor is identical to the data that we have. And I think that's really critically important, is they're on top of their data. They know where this virus is, they know where the virus isn't, and they know what they're doing to stop the virus. And I think that was very reassuring. So we discussed what some of the other governors and states are doing that are in similar situations. Now, in states like Mississippi or states like Alabama, where 95+% of counties have active community spread, that's why they did a mask mandate. Missouri has less than half their counties in that situation. So again, every one of these messages have to be adjusted, but every community member in Missouri should know how to protect themselves from the virus.
Should Missouri have a mask mandate?
Well, we discussed that specific issue related to Texas. You know, every public health official anywhere in the country will tell you it is easier to have a statewide mask mandate. But in this case, they think there was specific, if you can get 100% of the retailers to require masks, as we saw in Branson, and as we saw in some of the other smaller communities, it sends the message to the community that masks are important. And so we discussed that option about what Texas had done.
Good morning. Two questions. The CDC staff that is here in Missouri, Vice President Pence said they'd be coming here. Where are they at and what are they doing? And do you have any information on the vaccine trials going on at Washington University and St. Louis University medicine schools? Thanks.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And so we have been sending out what we call these craft teams that work on COVID directly, city by city. I believe they may be going to St. Louis, but I will look that up, or Kansas City, to really go to cities before they get into serious situation. We saw St. Louis's numbers go significantly up. We see Kansas City's numbers quite up. We talked at Kansas City about, and the mayors from both sides, to really understand what is going to be happening in Kansas City. We're starting to see improvement in St. Louis. We see Kansas City at a bit of a high plateau. We look, and I want to be clear, we look at those areas as contiguous. So when we look at New York City, we look at the whole metro area, whether it be in New Jersey or whether it be in Connecticut. And so we look at these cities that cross borders as a whole, then look at the counties on both sides where people may be sleeping and working, and understanding what that means for intermingling and exposure to the virus. And so those are the kinds of discussions we are having with mayors and governors to really work together across these borders. Because if you look at along the Missouri border and you look at along the Arkansas border, you can see spread of virus in those communities that join with other states that have higher viral spread. And what we're trying to do is having a statewide, but a US-wide mitigation approach in many of these areas that have cross-border activities. Vaccines, great question. We really want to appreciate the work that's being done across universities in this great land that are opened up to vaccine trials. And we want to thank every American who signed up for these vaccine trials and have enrolled in these vaccine trials. It's very important that we have people from all different walks of life participate in those trials, because when we complete those trials, we want to know that it's going to work in a 70-year-old. We want to know it works in a farmer. We want to know it works in someone who lives in an inner city. We want to know it works in black, brown, and white. We want to make sure it works for every American. And we are a diverse community joined together as one America. And so it's really important that when these trials open, that everybody takes the opportunity to contribute to the American experience to prevent COVID by contributing to these vaccines. If you've had COVID, if you become infected, and if you have recovered, please donate plasma. We've been working on increasing plasma donations. We think it's an important therapeutic. We are working on the data to really prove that it's a critical therapeutic. We're collecting that data from around the United States, but I really want to thank people from Missouri that are participating in vaccine trials. You are helping all of America, and for those of you donating plasma, thank you. Thank you. You are saving lives of others.
Hi, doctor. Thank you for the time. The health department tells me that the median age of those that die from COVID-19 in this state is 80 years, 8 months. In this city that we're in right now, there's a nursing home that's dealing with a pretty serious outbreak of COVID-19. 3 residents have already died. What ongoing federal help is there for congregate living facilities like long-term care facilities? I heard you praise the plan that's going on in the state right now. What ongoing federal help is there for facilities that are still dealing with this virus and still ravaging it in some cases?
Yeah, thank you. That's really a critical question. From March, and I just want to really thank my international colleagues, because many of them from around the world, particularly Europe, shared with us about the viral dynamics early on and what they were seeing in their countries. And so very early on, we were able to alert Americans to the unique risk of this virus to individuals with significant comorbidities and of a significant age. That was really critically important so that the federal government, as early as March, could be talking about how to protect the vulnerable. We asked them very early on to shelter in place. And it's throughout the criteria of opening up, we asked vulnerable Americans to continue to shelter in place because of that unique risk. At the same time, CMS, under Administrator Verma, has been writing guidelines and helping support strike teams into nursing homes across this great land. And in addition, over the last 2 months, we've been really surging PPE to nursing homes across the United States. And critically, we've been adding the ability to test. And so testing has gone out to almost 12 to 15% of nursing homes over the last 2 weeks. We'll continue to surge the ability to test into every single nursing home over the next 4 weeks until every nursing home has the ability to test their staff weekly. We know, and this is another illustration, nursing homes do not spontaneously become COVID-19 infected. It comes in through staff or visitors, primarily staff. That is the true thing about every single time we see spread into any congregate living or other site. So it reflects the community. And that's why we're calling on all members of the community to do what it takes to decrease the spread of this virus. It is critically important. And I just want to conclude that there are vulnerable individuals in this community today that don't live in long-term care facilities. There are individuals with significant cardiovascular disease, renal disease. There are individuals with diabetes and hypertension in multi-generational households. Let's help protect them. At the same time, we protect those in the nursing homes by ensuring every day that we're decreasing the community spread of this virus to protect Missourians, whether they're living in a nursing home or living in a city or living in a rural area, but have comorbidities.
Dr. Birx, welcome to Missouri. I was just liking to ask you, we have a capacity limit at I'm over here, this side.
Is there a woman standing here? I can take this one as long as we take her, too. Okay.
You want me to go ahead, or? Okay, real quickly. We have a capacity limit at restaurants and businesses. Parents are worried here in Missouri about sending their kids back to school. How can you send kids back to school when we still have capacity limits in restaurants and other businesses?
So it really depends on the county and the school district, and that's why we have been sending out these governor's reports, because it includes a county-by-county analysis. And every single county in every single school district should know precisely where they sit with test positivity. And so everyone should be taking precautions, and we would like to see test positivity and cases declining in the counties that have significant COVID spread that is greater than 10%, more than 15 per 100,000 cases, to really show that we're bringing those cases down. We know that restrictions on, let's be very clear where spread occurs. It spreads indoors and outdoors when we're close to each other and we have our masks off. It is difficult to eat and drink close to one another with your mask on. And so we need to ask ourselves every single time, outdoors or indoors, although outdoors is safer, we see spread occurring in outdoor parties too, is we need to say to ourselves, am I 6 feet apart at all times, or is my mask on? And if you can't answer that, then you shouldn't be there. And I think that's why we're asking restaurants to continue to social distance, to protect communities. We want to see every community in Missouri under 5% and under 5 per 100,000 cases. I think we all know that that is the goal, and we're going to make progress together by this clear pathway forward of these common sense interventions. So I think we have.
Thank you, Dr. Birx. When it comes to the governors across the state or across the country, that you have spoke with, do you believe that some governors put the business interest in front of health interest because of how fast they opened and how fast they wanted to make sure that businesses were okay before there is a vaccine, before they didn't mandate masks?
I can tell you, and now remember, I work in public health and in medicine and science. So governors will talk to me as a public health person. I have not, in my travels, of all 20 governors, and frankly, the hundreds of mayors that I've talked to on the telephone or in person, heard any of them voice that type of approach. All of them have started their discussion with me of what things can I do to protect the citizens more from COVID-19. And some of those discussions are very difficult, and I want to be very clear. Many governors are doing things that you talk about the economic piece, many of them have done things that they were worried about politically, but they have always put their citizens first, and that has been what's been most reassuring in traveling around the country, is how dedicated governors and mayors are to the people that they serve. And I think they really take this as a public service. And when they talk with me, they always start with, what more can I do? What do you see that I should do differently? I have those calls daily. I've talked to several of them just over the last few days, including the mayor of Honolulu, which has experienced a significant outbreak. These mayors and these governors, Democrat or Republican, have been very clear about how important the health of their community is. And I want to really end with that. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. You need to wear a mask and socially distance. You need to not have parties in your backyard and in your living room, and we need to stop the spread of this virus, because we can and we will together while we work on developing a vaccine together. Thank you very much.
All right, before we get into briefing day, Dr. Williams is also here today on the COVID-19 briefing, but first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the economy real quick before we get to COVID-19. On the economy recovery front, we continue to receive good news. In May, our unemployment rate was at 10.1. In June, it dropped to 7.9. Tomorrow, the July number will be announced, which will continue a trend in the right direction. We are very encouraged by these numbers, and will continue to do everything we can to help Missouri families, businesses, and communities to rebuild during this recovery. On Saturday, we had our weekly calls with our panel of infectious disease doctors across the state. Many of the recent trends we've been seeing remain the same. Looking at the age of 20 to 29 years old still account for more than 21% of the cumulative cases in Missouri so far. However, while we are still seeing an increase in positive cases statewide, our healthcare system is still managing the situation. Social distancing and masks are making a difference. I have said this many times. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Missouri is extremely diverse, and communities across the state all have different needs. All Missourians' high-risk areas have mask mandates in place, and I support those local leaders in that decision, and have since day one. I also want to point out that just because masks aren't mandated everywhere does not mean you shouldn't wear one, especially if you can't social distance. Again, this is not just about ourselves. It is about everyone around us. Our actions do make an impact. We have come a long way since March, and we must all continue to do our part to keep our families, friends, and neighbors safe. As I have said many times recently, our response to COVID-19 looks very different now than it did in March and April. Both nationwide and here in Missouri, testing capacity has not even close to where it is today in the past. We are testing just a few thousand a week. Now it is common to test more than 90,000 a week. To date, 468 long-term care facilities in Missouri have experienced at least one positive case of COVID-19, either residents, staff, or both. Since increasing our testing capabilities, we've been able to work more closely with the facilities who have been heavily impacted. DHSS now help nearly 400 congregated living facilities implementing the box-in testing strategy. The idea of this strategy came from a call with Dr. Birx, who you just heard from, and focuses heavily on testing, contact tracing, isolation, and quarantine. More than 115,000 tests have been conducted in long-term care facilities using the strategic and lives that are being saved. For that, we thank Dr. Birx and everyone who has worked hard to implement the strategy over and over again throughout Missouri. During April and May, more than 7% of all observed cases in Missouri each month were sadly fatal. In June, that number quickly dropped to less than 2%. And so far in August, it is now less than 0.5%. And this is good news. And as this impacts the behavior of COVID-19 continues to shift, we will continue to adapt to the needs of our citizens. On our infectious disease call Saturday, we also talked a lot about school reopening. Many schools will be starting within the next couple of weeks, and many have already had successful in-person summer schools, which is very encouraging. Although this is an exciting time of year, we know this year is also stressful and uncertain for many students, teachers, and families with the new challenges of COVID-19. To help with this process, we have worked closely with DESE and the Department of Health and Senior Services to provide as much guidance and assistance as possible. Earlier this month, DESE and DHSS released updated school reopening guidance to address more frequent asked questions about the upcoming school year. This document, which was initially released on July the 9th, now includes information and reactive strategies that Missouri schools should be prepared for with the reopening, such as what to do if a student or staff member becomes symptomatic at school, how to handle positive cases of COVID-19 in the school community, and how to best assist local health officials with contact identification and tracing. To assist school districts with PPE, 1.8 million cloth masks were made available through SEMA. DESE and DHS has also released PPE guidance for school nurses. I want to thank our school administrators, our teachers, our parents, our students, school nurses, maintenance crews, and all school staff members for working so hard for our Missouri kids. I appreciate all the time and hard work you put into the education of our future generation. And we are very grateful for all you have done to prepare for this school year and make sure our students stay as healthy and safe as possible. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Every school district will look different based on its unique needs. And we will continue to focus on the health and safety of our students. School staff and communities as a whole, we will move forward with this school year. With the new school year and more Missourians returning to work, we know that child care is also a big area of concern. The rest of this week, we will be visiting several child care facilities across the state to discuss how they have adapted to the challenges of COVID-19. And as always, please continue to be safe, be smart, and be responsible. Social distancing is a key. Wearing a mask is a key. Washing your hands is a key. We all are not defenseless. We all know how to do these things now, and it is up to us to continue taking steps to slow the spread. Thank you all for being here today, and God bless. And we want to take Dr. Williams. Let's say, Dr. Williams, you want to take some questions here?
Just want to start out real quick and just say what an incredibly important day this is for me, for Ambassador Birx to be here with the governor. It emphasizes something that the governor has said. We are not powerless against this virus. And I think back to, I think it was March or April, I was on the phone with Ambassador Birx, and she talked about boxed-in strategy moving forward. And I immediately perked up and learned more about that and went to the governor, and he green-lighted it. And that was to do testing. And I remember vividly a weekend with Kelly Volmer in Jefferson County when I said, "Are you up to trying this?" And she said, "Randall, you know, I'll try anything. We've got a real problem here." And we did it, and it worked. And that has led, this many months later, to 115,000 tests in over 400 of our 1,200 long-term care facilities, with a positivity rate of staff and residents, I think, around 2 to 3%. But when you look at our mortality, as the governor just said, from then, both in cases per 100,000 and just the number, it has dramatically decreased even as our cases have risen. So as I said last week, where we are in Missouri right now is we are 16th in the United States for cases per 100,000. We were 14th last week. But Ambassador Birx, presented the governor's report, and we talked about that. She wanted feedback, so she and I talked about that. We are 14th in the United States for new cases per 100,000. That's 14th out of 50 states. And we are 18th for our positivity rate over the last 7 days. So those are huge milestones, even as our cases increase to about 1,100, 1,200 a day, which is lower than the national average of 1,600. But as she said, and the governor has said, we have to focus so much on our strategy on protecting our vulnerable populations, and we have to very much work to do everything we can to decrease the number of cases among our 20 to 30-year-olds where we're seeing resurgence. I will say this, Ambassador Birx, as great as she has been for the state of Missouri, she did leave with 2 Kansas City Chiefs face masks, which we bought her, and we got her 2 scarves. She loves her scarves, so she now has a University of Missouri scarf and a American flag scarf. So I hope everybody will be watching TV. She said she'll wear them, so when you see either the American flag or the University of Missouri, just know that came from the state of Missouri. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
So Dr. Birx talked a lot about St. Louis towards the end of July. Over here.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so she talked a lot about Missouri towards the end of July and the positivity rate. Yeah. It really stressed that since then, the presumptive numbers have skyrocketed as far as just the positivity rate goes. Did you guys talk about a strategy to fight that in a city as big as St. Louis or Kansas City?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We talked about the fact that last week, 45% of our cases in Missouri were in 3 counties, St. Louis, Jackson, and St. Charles. So for the whole state of 6.1 million, 45% were in 3 counties. And so the craft team that she mentioned was in St. Louis about 10 days ago. They were previously in Kansas City. And again, that is ASPR, HHS, CDC, everyone. And the message there was that we really need to increase our testing, especially in northern St. Louis, continue to do that. But that we also have to just target our messaging very specifically on 20 to 30-year-olds. As we push this out, we just see more and more they go out symptomatic. they don't wear masks, they don't social distance. She had a great point. I don't know if you heard that, but, the fact is they go out, and then when they do that, at least we would hope they would get tested quickly. But anecdotally, I have to tell you that I'm getting reports back that they're not getting tested on purpose because they don't want to go through the circumstances that might create. And so that saddens me because, as she said, that judgment leads to other consequences among a lot of other people. I was talking to somebody this morning who was going to get tested, and I said, well, better you're positive than to find out 2 days from now you're positive and have to call 30 of your friends and go, oh, by the way, you're now quarantined. So my message today for you is we really want young people to get tested. If you've been in a situation or you know of a situation, think of those around you and please get tested. Thank you for your question.
Hi, Dr. Williams.
Hey, Philip.
From your experience with nursing home outbreaks in the state so far, when COVID does get into a facility, how does it spread within the facility usually?
Yeah, it'd be a little bit anecdotal, Philip. I think really two mechanisms. One is usually introduced by staff, so that staff is seeing other people. And then also, if they're not identified quickly enough, they are in congregated facilities. They're around each other. And so the key, as we found out with our boxed-in testing, is to get in real quick and test everybody and then isolate and follow up with the contact tracing.
Is it just that close quarters nature, or is it through not wearing PPE or not washing hands? Is it?
I believe it's just the congregated nature of it. I mean, if you look at prisons, nursing homes, cruise ships, it literally is being that close together, I think, is what really drives it, even in other environments. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you. Back to schools, if I could.
Yes.
Each district has kind of made their own plan with guidance, certainly,
Yes.
from your office and from the state. However, what is your discussions with DESE or even MISHA on sports? I know sports is such a big part
Sure.
of the school experience, and there seems to be even differences among conferences, school
Yes.
conferences of what they're doing.
And you see that nationally among the football conferences. I've talked to both. We've had good conversations with both. Often the easiest path is not the best one. And so the easiest path would just to be close anything or everything as far as sports is concerned. But we think that the whole school experience is just really, really so incredibly important to my family and my children that we've talked with them about continuing to do that, but not business as usual, to do it differently. For instance, obviously in football there's going to be close contact, but that doesn't mean when you're on the sidelines you all have to be 1 foot apart from each other, that you need to be conscious about that. So we think, and it's just not sports, there are other things like band and choir and clubs and things like that we think are so much part of building students' character. I mean, I bet you if I asked all of you to reflect back on your high school years, there was just so much meaning you got from coaches and instructors, and maybe it was journalism, maybe you would work for the school paper. We just think that's such a big part of education and character development that we are doing everything we can because we think it's so important to try to make it happen.
We'll take 2 more questions. Andrew and then Lucas, and then we'll bring it up.
This is kind of a 2-part question here. The Kansas City Chiefs said that they want to have 22% of capacity in their stadium. That's about 16,000 fans. What are your thoughts on that, kind of based off of what we just heard from Dr. Birx, where she said she would really like to see 100% of retailers get on with requiring masks. How do you kind of bring those two together to kind of mesh together?
Did they say anything about me being one of those fans? I would say that first. Just kidding. Again, I think that the NFL is being incredibly thoughtful about how to do this, and they have some things to learn from Major League Baseball, for instance, Major League Soccer. So I would say that the litmus test we have for them is, are you being thoughtful? Are you looking at data? Are you learning from your experiences? You're just not throwing the ball out and pretending it's business as usual. And so you would say that my sense is, and I know they've been in conversations, that they're being incredibly thoughtful about that. And so I would affirm that. But that my litmus test was, do you have data? Are you learning from others? Are you really thinking this through?
And kind of my second point on all of that is, with Dr. Birx saying that 100% of retailers should really kind of get on board to reinforce the importance of wearing masks in the community, is it something that the state is looking at to try and have businesses and restaurants that aren't requiring them, like say in some of the tourist areas like the lake, to require faculty and people shopping or dining in to wear those masks?
No, it's not at this time for sure. Again, I just mentioned 45 or 50% of our cases are in 3 counties. And so one thing the ambassador talked about that I found fascinating was she's been around to 20 states, talked to 20 governors. So she's a huge resource for information. And she says one thing you have to be careful when you talk about this, when you try to put a one-size-fits-all, I think she said it 3 times, so I really wrote it down, is just COVID fatigue. That people become very fatigued if you're too draconian in your requirements, so that when later they might be needed, for instance, when your cases go up, they're so worn out that when you need them to do it the most, they just simply are worn out. She talked about that. So I think we try to be very judicious and thoughtful and not have a one-size-fits-all, partly because of that idea that one always needs to marshal your resources to where the needs are.
Final question.
Hi, Doctor.
Hey, Lucas.
Will you be making any changes to the way the health department tackles this virus because of your talk with Dr. Birx today?
That's a great question. I've got to sit back and reflect on it. Next time we meet, I'll follow up with you on that. I found her comments, just because she's been to 20 states and shared those. And we think there's so much to be gained in a novel emerging virus from learning what others are doing. One thing she talked about that I'm very interested in, she was very enamored with the Arkansas book that went out to all school-age children, both for their parents and the students. And her enthusiasm for that kind of made me enthusiastic. So that's one thing I'm going to talk about with Margie today, to take a look at that booklet and see if that's something that might work for Missouri. So that would be one example. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Governor Parson.
Hi, Governor.
Hi.
Dr. Birx recommended kind of following the Texas strategy with implementing a mask mandate in counties with like 20 or more active cases. Is that something you plan on doing?
Yeah, let me just say this, and it kind of goes with the question that was just asked to Dr. Williams. I think every day this can be a moving target. I think you need to be able to make changes with the data that you receive and where we're going in the state. So when you see what Texas did, I think that's a great model. They took it on a percentage base to decide when you tell people to put a mask on or when you mandate that, depending on the data that you're driven. And I think that's one thing we're always looking at. We know in the state of Missouri where our high areas are that are already mask mandated. We already know that. So a lot of areas like that comes out of the decision process when they're already doing it. So then you look at those counties out there that maybe in a rural setting, what's the healthcare system there? How many people are really affected? What is the real cause of that? But you have to look at all of that in Missouri. I mean, you can't base everything on just rural Missouri, and you can't base everything on Kansas City and St. Louis. There's just so much in between there. So, but I think a lot of things, Dr. Birx talked about are good things to see what other governors are doing. I think the one thing that she'll stress to you that she stressed every meeting today was personal responsibility. And given in a college town, let's just say you want to shut the bars down at a certain time or you don't want kids to go to a bar. They're going to go somewhere. We all know that. Truth is, they're going to go somewhere and they're going to hang out and stuff. What is the responsibility when they do that, knowing that the possibility is they're the ones spreading that? Are they going to go get tested 4 days later? Should they be tested 4 days later? Which I would say they probably should, if they're going to put themselves in that environment, and to make sure you're not spreading that to the families and the communities. I think the one thing we learned from Dr. Birx, one of the things I learned today, you have a tendency sometimes to look at whose fault this virus is. And it's a virus at the end of the day. And it's being spread by our own communities wherever we live. No matter where you live, the virus is sure the potential to be out there. So I think you have to be aware of that, and it comes back, again, to a lot of personal responsibility. What are you willing to do for your neighbors, for your families, and for your friends?
And you mentioned the one thing that you took away from Dr. Birx. Is there one piece of advice that you would implement in the state of Missouri that she gave you today, in particularly in the city of St. Louis as well, or what's the?
Well, again, as the governor, you've got the whole state to
Right.
deal with. It's hard to just say, what would I do in this little pocket right here?
Right.
So I would say the real big takeaways, I think, from Dr. Birx today is this really comes down to responsibility of all of us as individuals. I think that's one of the things you really see. You can have the guidelines all day long, which I agree with, having guidelines, no matter who that is or what that is. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to take those guidelines. We do, as Missourians, have got to say, are we willing to do that? Are we willing to give up social gatherings? Are we willing to give up the social distancing, or are we going to continue to do that? I think that's one of the things it comes down to. When you look at what Dr. Birx was showing you today of the southern states, the map of the southern states, and you really see from Arizona, like she said, to Florida, we've been very fortunate to this point. We truly have in Missouri. Now, we've had our share of hot spots, don't get me wrong, and I know those numbers in those areas that Dr. Williams said. But when you look at where Arkansas was, Texas was, Illinois was, all our surrounding states, the numbers were going up, extreme problems. But the reality of it, you're in the middle of that. And you know that if that keeps working up, we got to be a little bit more prepared. We got to do a little bit more and make sure we're ready for that. I think that's one of the takeaways you get with these meetings, and you see what other governors have done. So I think there's a lot of takeaways from what Dr. Birx said today for us to take a look at. But the one thing I'll also say, it's very important that you understand the data, not just a reaction because what's politically popular or what's not politically popular. You need to really base decisions on data. Whether it's in St. Louis is totally different than Douglas County or Wright County is totally different. So you've got to be able to look at that. And as governor, I got to be able to take those counties and I got to look at the big cities and figure out where does Missourians want to be in this.
Governor Parson, I'm going to switch gears on you here. We're going to go to special session.
All right.
So first off this morning, Representative Meredith wanted to put a rule into when the House reconvenes next week about wearing masks here inside the Capitol. That's outside of your scope that you wanted, but he's saying that they're putting lives at risk every day by coming in the Capitol. Do you have a response to his proposal this morning?
I'm not familiar with the proposal, what it is. So he's wanting to mandate
Mask inside
masks
the Capitol.
in the Capitol. Well, he has the ability to do that. I guess the House and the Senate could make that version if they wanted to for their members coming into the Capitol. I'm not sure what you mean on my end of it.
What would you like to see that? Do you think it's needed?
Oh, I think the legislatures, they need to make the decision whether they're going to mandate it in the Capitol or not for their own bodies. I mean, you got to be pretty careful with that, from the executive branch to the legislative branch of what they do. I wish it was easy enough they just do what I tell them to do all the time. But the real world don't work that way. But that's up to them. If they want to mandate their own House to do that or their own Senate to do that, they're welcome to do that. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I've said all along.
Hi, Governor. I apologize if I missed it. Any update on Missouri's participation in the federal unemployment program? I know the state was approved for that from the president's executive order earlier this month. Will the state be participating in that, putting money toward it?
I believe we will. I believe we will. We're working on the guidelines on that right now, but I think that's very important to us. I think early on we were one of the first states that applied for the unemployment. Again, we were one of the first states to receive it again just because we were out in front of most of the other states. So I think what we're looking at is those guidance. How are you going to do the 300 versus what are you going to do with the 100? And I think that's what we're going to look at. How you pay for that 100 side of it versus the federal government, how we're doing it. But we got people looking at that right now. My staff's looking at that, trying to figure out a solution for that.
But you're supportive of... You're supportive then of putting the $100, by the sounds of it, toward that program as well.
We're trying to find a way to do that. We're trying to find a way to do it as long as we can afford it and do it. But, I will also remind, we're in a little bit of not the best financial situation. I mean, we're going through a little bit of tough times here. But again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. If the economy keeps kind of going where it's going, unemployment numbers keep going, makes those decisions a little easier as we get that information.
Back to special session one more time about concurrent jurisdiction this time. The other bills have moved forward, and today they're all being heard in Rules Committee. but there's still nothing about this concurrent jurisdiction bill.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on that? I hear that the House kind of has cold feet to bring it up.
Well, I'm not sure what it is. I was kind of hoping we get, especially the 1 through 6, I was hoping we get them done fairly quickly. As we know, that didn't quite happen that way, but it's okay as long as we're moving forward on it, on those two things that really is going to make a difference for our law enforcement officers. The jurisdiction, I think the one thing that a lot of misinformation out there about that is people read through it and want to put a little bit of a political spin on it. But the reality of it is, I think as we talk to the legislatures, I had a call with a lot of the legislators last week. One of the things we talked about, kind of walking them through in it. Because this is not anybody, the Attorney General cannot go in there and just take over cases from the city prosecutor. Number one, it has to be 90 days before anything's not filed for that to happen. And two, the local level has to ask the AG to get involved. So a little misconception out there with kind of the spin that's on this, but the Attorney General cannot go in there unless he's asked to go in there. He can't do that. So I think that ought to be out there. I think it ought to be discussion. Look, we know one thing. And I'll just use the Legends case for just what happened. The reality of it is when the federal government, the state government, and the local levels work together to fight violent criminals, there is a success and there is a path forward for that, as we just seen. We ought to all be on the same page when it comes to taking off murderers off the street. And again, I'm going to go back to what we should be talking about all times, the victims and families that are out there that normally gets left out of this process because of the political spin on it. All right, thanks everybody for being here today. Thank you.